Hi, my name is Lauren Clark, and I chose to research Ohio State Social Studies standards for my curriculum analysis for EDU 511. My certification is K-12 Special Ed and Elementary General Ed, so I felt that this was pretty applicable to my content area. So I was reading through the website for these social studies standards, and the real purpose that Ohio Board of Educators gave for revamping their standards in the first place was this first quote actually. Ohio Social Studies content standards serve as a basis for what all students will know and will be able to do in social studies by the time they graduate. And they really set this as the goal to help students develop the ability to make informed and reasoned decisions for themselves and for the common good, which I just think goes above and beyond, but also to prepare students for their role as citizens and decision makers in a diverse and democratic society. So their vision is kind of as follows. I think it's really important to recognize that they set high expectations and provide strong support. They want to represent knowledge and skills needed to make transitions successful into the real world. They want to make informed standards by national standards, address decision making as citizens, rigorous progression across all grades. I think this really sets the scene for the analysis of this curriculum because right away we can see that the intentions are not to foster high stakes testing or testing as a career, but for me personally, this helps me support this curriculum immediately. Moving on to the foundations of this curriculum, we can see that the foundations really stem from these bulleted points. So the goals were conducted by working groups of teachers who have a hands-on experience with the curriculum, professors and curriculum supervisors, as well as in-depth reviews conducted by the nation's experts. I think this really goes to show that they did their research, for one. Also, this curriculum was presented by the Ohio Department of Education in June 2010. However, the State Board of Education actually approved this new standardized curriculum in 2002 when Ohio updated their standards. They organized their new ideas into 4 main goals, which we'll touch on later in the presentation. So, as we move on to organization, I stated before that I chose the K-12 Ohio State Social Studies Standards, and the goals for the following revision of standards, as I was referring to earlier, include communicating the most essential concepts, so not an overload of concepts for these students to grasp, more manageable for teachers, and allowing the students to elicit a greater depth. So kind of like I said, not an overload. They always say education is a mile wide and an inch deep, but that doesn't really allow students to learn anything but the surface level concepts that they won't get very far with those. And last, a progression of content grade to grade, so students receive a recap after a summer break or something along those lines before throwing new concepts at them with no regard for building off schema. There are 2 ways that these standards are being aligned. The first is horizontal alignment, meaning the content is a strand of the grade level topics. And then the second is vertical alignment, which is a progression from grade to grade. So just like I was saying, building off schema. For the next slide, we go right into the content of the curriculum. The content is organized appropriately, to meet the standards and needs of every student. So, for example, the newly revised standards call for syllabi to better meet the needs of the high schoolers. Syllabi allow for these students to look at what is going to be learned, what will be due, and what is expected. I personally use the syllabus constantly, and I just think, like, in my high school career, I wish I would have had a syllabus. The curriculum also calls for well-equipped teachers who have adequate knowledge of the content. There's authentic learning taking place in the classroom because the curriculum specifically calls for an emphasis on 21st century skills being taught in order to better meet the needs of the student, and like I said earlier, to set them up for success in the future when they're transitioning out of high school. Diving more deeply into the content and the way the curriculum is set up, each skill mentioned is actually a topic. So historical thinking, spatial thinking, civic participation, economic design making, financial literacy. These are all skills that the curriculum actually discusses. And I thought it was really interesting because they give a description of each of these topics that communicate to teachers one specified expectation that they are all able to individually teach and apply to their lessons. So not every teacher is going to interpret this description the same. However, they are all going to be on the same page, which I think is just really helpful when it comes to curriculum mapping because that's the purpose it was designed for. So just to give you a little example, the curriculum actually gave a graph, and on one side it had the strand, so history, geography, government, economics, and so forth, and then the topic, so historical thinking and those skills, and the description goes like this. Historical thinking begins with a clear sense of time, past, present, and future, and becomes more precise as students progress. Historical thinking includes skills such as locating, researching, analyzing, and interpreting primary and secondary sources so that students can begin to understand the relationships, events, and draw conclusions. So this can go within any grade level, however, it's specifically geared towards high school in this sense, but any student is able to maybe look at George Washington, realize that he has an enormous white wig on, and recognize that he's not from our day and age where the president wears, well, he has a comb over, or something to that effect. So, all of this is great, and their intentions seem very clear. However, this curriculum needs to be assessed in order to be monitored, kept track of, and assured of accuracy and effectiveness. So the different types of assessment that Ohio focuses on are as follows. So the orientation of learning of the learning objective starts out with the concepts discussed, such as historical thinking, as we talked about in the last slide, and is typically introduced in the earlier grades, and then it makes it easier to continuously build upon, just like we were talking about schema, with students locating and analyzing primary and secondary sources, and then they're able to make inferences and draw conclusions from them. So one way Ohio focuses on assessment is through the use of formative assessment. Some examples of that are data analysis through interpretation of maybe maps or diagrams, inferring based on analysis of information. So as I was saying before, maybe they have to interpret what time period it is based on what the president is wearing, or any number of skills that apply to a lesson such as that. Creating timelines to represent significant events, etc. And finally, my critique of this curriculum, I felt that there were positives and negatives. So some of the positives that I foresaw: the content was age appropriate yet challenging. However, it was not frustrating. The projects and assignments that I would assume teachers are implementing definitely aligned with the standards set in place by this curriculum. There was a sequence in the way the curriculum was written, and there was even a guide to reading the curriculum. So not only was there a way to allow you to interpret it, but you could also stand back not knowing anything that goes on in Ohio schools and be able to read it clearly, which I thought was really impressive. The stakeholders that created the curriculum spent much time revising old standards, which one can assume they did intentionally because something was not working, which means that they were monitoring their curriculum very closely. And I think this is really a large benefit of curriculum mapping, which goes right into what we learned about in this course. But some of the negatives that I saw, the curriculum did not really specify what summative assessments were used. I couldn't really find the type of evaluation model that was used for teachers or if they relied on high-stakes testing, which is a very important factor to me. No rubrics were really discussed, even if the teachers didn't use them. They did not discuss what means of grading they would use or what they would be relying on for measuring the students' abilities. And the intent was exceptional and the goals were very well outlined. However, I didn't see the follow-through or the implementations of specified techniques they planned to use to gain data that the goals were being met, such as 21st century skill set. That's awesome, but how do you plan on creating those opportunities, or what were your specific goals in regard to that specific goal, I guess, or objective? But overall, I thought that their intentions were very clear. And these are my references. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.